and welcome to today's live stream, hosted by Global Talent Immigration Law Group. I am Brian Walker, and I will be your host for this session. Today we are diving into an important topic, how the upcoming election could impact O-1 visas and EB-1 green cards. Our expert speakers, attorneys Liz Profumo and Jordana Schwartz-Matricardi, will walk us through the potential changes and explain what they could mean for those navigating the extraordinary ability visa process. Liz and Jordana will begin by addressing pre-submitted questions from attendees, providing tailored insights and advice. After covering these, they will open the floor to your questions, giving you the opportunity to engage directly and receive answers in real time. Whether you are currently holding an O-1 or EB-1 visa or are considering applying, this session is designed to provide you with the information you need to stay informed and prepared. We are excited to have you with us today, and we encourage you to participate in the chat and share your thoughts. Now, without further ado, let us welcome Liz Profumo and Jordana Schwartz-Matricardi.
We've put together a short video comparing how these types of cases have fared under the Biden-Harris administration and the Trump administration. After the video, Jordana and I will be back to answer questions live. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Hi, my name is Liz Profumo. I'm the managing partner here at Global Talent Immigration Law Group. Today, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how we think the upcoming elections might impact O-1 visas and EB-1 green card cases. Today's talk is just focused on O-1s and EB-1s. We're not talking about all of immigration policy under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration. Both administrations have been more active on immigration than any others in U.S. history. Trump actually passed 472 executive orders related to immigration, and Biden had far surpassed that by the beginning of this year with over 535. And though only a fraction of these might apply to business immigration and to O-1s and EB-1s, there's still plenty to talk about. And so that's what we'll be focusing on today. So keep in mind, the Trump administration came into power in January of 2017, and they were in office 2017, 18, 19, and 20, with an exit in January of 2021. And the Biden administration has been in place since January of 2021 until now. So the big question on everyone's mind is, how will the election of one of these candidates impact my O-1 or EB-1 case? So let's start with approval rates, because that's really the most important factor here. So under Trump, the approval rates between 2017 and 2020 fluctuated from, on the lower end, 89.7% approval rate, into the highest rate being 94.1. So there was still quite a high approval rate for O-1 visas overall. Now under Biden, also the lowest rate we saw was the first year in office in 2021. The approval rate was 91.4. The highest we've seen was the next year in 2022 of 94.6. So they've been consistently approved under both administrations at a rate between 90 and 95%. Though a couple years under Trump were a couple of points lower, there was not a massive impact on the O-1 visas, thankfully. Now, for EB-1 approval rates, we saw that actually in 2017, under the Trump administration, we saw quite a high level of approvals of EB-1A extraordinary ability green cards. They approved 8,500 this year. Now, unfortunately, USCIS doesn't publish the number of EB-1A cases they received, which would then allow us to calculate the approval percentage. What they do provide is the number of all EB-1 petitions that were received, which includes the EB-1A, extraordinary ability, the EB-1B, outstanding researcher, and EB-1C, multinational managers and executives. So what we do know is that out of all the EB-1 cases in 2017, USCIS received 32,000 total of all three of the EB-1 categories. And out of those, 8,500 were approved EB-1A extraordinary ability petitions. In 2018, the number dropped a bit. They approved 7,200 EB-1As out of 28,300 applications. In 2019, they approved 4,700 EB-1As and received 24,000 EB-1 petitions. In 2020, they dipped to 4,200 out of 21,000. So actually, there is a pretty large dip between approval rate of 7,200 in 2018 and 4,700 in 2019. Now, the approval rate in 2020 also dipping lower. Obviously, that was during the pandemic, and USCIS was closed for much of that time. So it's hard to know know how much of that drop is related to immigration policy and how much is just related to COVID shutdowns. Each year under Biden, from 2021 till now, we've seen an increase in EB-1 approvals. So again, we're starting in 2020 at a base of 4,200 approvals. In 2021, we go up to 5,400 out of 22,000 applications. At 2022, we jump up to 7,200 from 26,000 applications. 2023, we're up again to 8,100 approvals, although USCIS is listing a receipt of 37,000 applications, which is more than 10,000 more than previous cases. Not sure what's going on there. And actually those additional 10,000 were all for multinational managers and executives. So I think the takeaway for 2023 is an approval rate of 8,100, which is the highest since 2017. And then in 2024 so far, they haven't published statistics obviously for the entire year, but so far we're at a good pace, 6,055 approvals so far out of 30,000 cases received. Let's move on to talk a little bit more about processing times. We'll start with O-1s. USCIS doesn't publish processing time, so all the information I'm sharing is really from Global Talent's records. So there's nothing earth-shattering here, but under the Trump administration, we saw that O-1 visa processing on average was taking about 84 days with USCIS, and then under Biden, 75 days. Slightly longer under Trump, but also, again, this takes into account the pandemic and all the delays that occurred from that were not related strictly to immigration policy. EB-1 processing times, on the other hand, have been very, very different under these administrations. Under the Biden administration since 2021, we can approximate about 1 year for EB-1 processing, meaning that if you apply for a green card in the EB-1 category, you're likely to get it in a year or less. Under the Trump administration, because of the additional administrative layers that the administration put in, coupled by the closures based on COVID, actually most EB-1 green cards were not adjudicated under the Trump administration. So meaning that though there were I-140s that were approved and the government did agree that people had extraordinary ability under Trump, even though for the last 2 years it was at a significantly lower level, they didn't actually approve the green card applications. They just left them open and pending until the Biden administration came in 2021, and at that point, most people that applied under the Trump administration were approved. What have each of these administrations done to impact processing times? We'll start with O-1s under the Trump administration. One thing that Trump did was suspended interview waivers for O-1 visas at embassies. What that means is that previously, if people that had been issued O-1 visas in the past, when you went to renew it at the consulate, you would be allowed to waive your interview and mail your passport in to have the O-1 issued. The Trump administration rolled that back, and so everyone had to appear in person for every visa issuance. The Trump administration also suspended premium processing at various points throughout their tenure. So out of the 4 years that they were in office, about half that time premium processing wasn't available, meaning that if there was an important job that was coming up in a few weeks or a month, there was no way to make sure that your petition could get approved so you could try to get to the embassy. Let's look at the EB-1s a little bit, the green cards. The Trump administration also had put in place a policy whereby all people applying for green cards would be required to attend an interview. This is something new. Prior to the Trump administration, anyone who applied for an EB-1 green card would just receive it in the mail and was not required to attend an interview unless there was something in the record that could have been questionable or problematic. The Trump administration put in a policy that everyone would have to be interviewed, and then it took so long to process the cases, and then COVID hit. So it turns out that no one was interviewed and no one completed their green card process with this interview policy. Now, when the Biden administration came in 2021, they rolled back the interview requirement and started issuing the green cards by mail as they had been prior to the Trump administration. There were also some policies that were put in place that actually just made visa processing in general a little bit harder. The first one is travel bans. So I don't know if you recall, the very first week in office, Trump banned the entry of citizens from certain countries, mostly Middle Eastern, and then as time went on, certain countries would be added and removed from the list. At some point, that did also include citizens of China. There was also a policy put in place referred to as extreme vetting. This is where they started collecting people's social media information. They also started requiring proof that applicants would not become a public charge. What this means is that they are making everyone prove that they have the ability to provide financial support to themselves and looking at extensive financial documentation that was never required before, and certainly could prove burdensome, especially to people who work in the arts, especially to people who might be young and starting out their careers. That was something that worried a lot of applicants, though many people, at the end of the day, most people were still admitted. It didn't end up resulting in a lot of visa denials, but it was something that caused people worry for quite some time. There was also the administration put in place a policy called Buy American, Hire American, which essentially added a layer for employers to explain why this person, this foreign national, was needed and why a U.S. worker wasn't able to do the job. And again, this was also something new that had not been required before. On the other hand, under the Biden-Harris administration, we actually saw, both by necessity and intentionally, a lot of programs that resulted rather in automation and innovation of a lot of the different USCIS processes. So they increased the number of applications that can be filed online. They allowed court hearings to be held remotely. They allowed attorneys to appear telephonically and by video. They did waive interviews for visas at consulates. And they also extended the validity period of documents that bestowed status on people to allow for backlogs to clear for processing of various applications. So what does each candidate have in store for the future? Harris hasn't said much about plans that will impact O-1 or EB-1 applicants or visa holders. Harris did announce that she intends to add 250,000 green cards over the next 5 years, most of them employment-based, but also some additional family-based green cards. Trump, on the other hand, has announced numerous policies. And actually, I want to start with the one that I actually think is the most favorable here, which is he's proposing green cards for students who graduate from U.S. colleges and universities. So if he was able to actually implement this, this would be something wonderful, in my opinion. Switching gears, he's also proposing to end birthright citizenship, meaning to remove the rule that allows people to become U.S. citizens upon birth in the United States. And certainly that would face a lot of court challenges should it even make it that far, but it is a proposal. There is also a proposal to deport pro-Palestinian student protesters, and there is a plan to increase ideological screening, meaning that when people apply for visas, a lot more looking into their personal beliefs to see if they do hold beliefs that are problematic to the Trump administration. He is also planning to bring back some of his favorites from last time, namely the border wall, the Muslim ban, which this time would also include citizens of Gaza. He's also looking to eliminate all the temporary protected status programs, as well as the parole programs that are put in place for people that are the victims of natural disasters, as well as the humanitarian programs that are put in place for certain citizens of Central America. Hi, everybody. We're back. You know, in putting together the numbers and the statistics for today's talk, you know, what I really took away is that despite the fact that the Trump administration tried really hard to block immigration of all kinds, actually all of the many executive orders did not reduce the number of people immigrating. That's true for legal immigrants. It's true for non-immigrant visa holders. It's also true for asylum seekers. They were effective in reducing refugee admissions, but all other types of immigration actually remained at similar levels. You know, under Biden-Harris, there's certainly a very pro-immigration administration. There have actually been record numbers of approvals and admissions in the last 2 fiscal years. And so we would hope to see that that would continue going forward. So with all that in mind, we want to go ahead and answer some questions. We did have people that sent questions in advance, so we thought we'd start with those, and then we'll jump to the questions in the chat here. So if you have any questions, please do go ahead and put them in there if they haven't been answered. Okay, so the first question came in from Kai in Los Angeles, and she's asking how the election might impact EB-1s as a citizen of Hong Kong.
All right, good question. So if a Trump administration were to take office again, we might see lower approval rates for the EB-1s across the board. However, on a positive note, citizens of Hong Kong are not subject to the backlog or retrogression akin to the citizens of China. So they would not be, dealing with those long wait times. Okay, next question comes from Mao in Rosemead, and he is asking, will the O-1 visa become harder to get approved?
So, well, we don't have any reason to believe that the standards will get any higher for O-1 approval. Under the Trump administration, even though for a couple of the years they were down a couple percentage points, they were still approving them at more than 90%. So I don't have any reason to believe that O-1s will get harder to get approved. And that also applies to people who are renewing their O-1s. I saw that there were also questions about that. So in terms of USCIS approving O-1s, I don't anticipate any negative impact. Now, when people visit US embassies to get their O-1 stamped into their passport, that might be a little bit of a different story. I don't know exactly what to expect at embassies, but under the last Trump administration, if there were to be another Trump administration, I think we would expect more bureaucracy, more administration, more administrative layers, and just more vetting at the embassy level, and not that would affect any one particular group of people, although there is some talk about doing more vetting for ideological views, meaning that people who have views that are adverse to the Trump administrations could be barred from getting visas. But overall, sorry, long answer to just say O-1 approval rates, we don't expect them to dip dramatically.
Okay.
Okay, let's see, who do we have next? We have Matt from Pasadena asking, how would the application criteria for EB-1 change?
So, like we've already discussed before, under a Trump administration, there could be stricter enforcement of existing immigration laws in general, but we don't foresee any specific changes to the EB-1 application criteria. And there have been none that were previously announced, even in the last Trump administration. So any changes would likely focus on just tightening up eligibility all across the board. Just making it harder to get approved. But again, we don't foresee any specific changes to the actual eligibility requirements, the criteria, the threshold necessarily.
Right. And actually, I just want to make a point about the EB-1s in that EB-1s are not easy to get. They've never been easy to get approved. So though the numbers did dip during the second half of the Trump administration, I don't want anyone to be under the misperception that under Biden-Harris, it's an easy case type and that they're going to approve everyone who applies under EB-1, just because unfortunately it's never been the case.
True. Okay, the next question comes from Viswanath in Phoenix. And Viswanath asks, how is the O1A application going to be affected by the elections, if at all?
Yeah, so, O1A, O1B, I don't expect any negative impact on them. And actually, under the Biden-Harris administration, there has been a focus on clarifying the guidance to make sure that as many qualified applicants as USCIS gets, that they are in fact approved for O1A. So I anticipate they'll continue to get approved at that, hopefully more like a 93 to 95% approval rate. That's what I'll hope for the future for O1As. Let's see. Oh, Christian wrote in with a really good question here. Christian wants to understand what to expect on EB-1 timelines. The EB-1 visa dates for India have barely moved in the last few months. While there is a backlog, it used to be current until a couple years ago. Can we expect longer waiting times going forward?
That is a good question. And it's not that straightforward of an answer. Under both administrations, Trump and Biden, Harris, there have been, long wait times and backlogs, specifically for foreign nationals from India, China, and the Philippines. However, the backlog for India and those other countries is primarily due to high demand relative to the amount of visas that are available. And we recently read a Forbes article that had a percentage. It stated that 7%, or they only that the annual visa caps had a per country limit of 7%. So, obviously the per country limit is going to harm those countries with the highest amount of applicants and citizens, relative to the percentage that USCIS is approving.
Right. It was surprising when the EB-1 category backlogged a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, I am not aware of any action that's on the horizon that's going to eliminate the backlog to the level where it was before, where visas were immediately available for citizens of India and China. We'll hope that somehow the backlog clears, but like you said, there's a lot of people from those countries who are at the very top of their field, just waiting for their priority dates to become current.
Yeah, perhaps congressional action might help with that, but it probably will require some other actions.
That's a good point. Well, Harris, Walz are proposing adding 250,000 green cards over the next 5 years, or 50,000 each year, and they haven't specified if how that will apply to different categories, or if they'll increase percentage per for any countries, but maybe that's something to potentially help or look forward to.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so the next question comes from Jen in Jersey. Well, I think we actually sort of answered that, so why don't we try something a little bit different. Yalan from LA asks, will the new government affect the border policy if we leave the US and come back after a new administration comes into office?
Well, so border policy in general is going to, there will be, both administrations will do a lot of things at the border, but I don't see that impacting anyone who's traveling with visas or on ESTA. So Yalan, I'm not exactly sure how to answer your question, but one of the points it makes me think of is that, despite we all lived through the 4 years of, the Trump administration and the constant changes and the constant new rules that were implemented with no guidance, both to us as advocates as well as to the government employees who are expected to enforce them. And it was just one after the next. And by the end of the 4-year period, we were all exhausted. However, what we have seen is that it did end. And when Biden-Harris came in, they were able to reverse and undo a lot of those burdensome policies that caused all of us stress, that caused delays, that caused denials. So your question makes me think of is the fact that if we do end up with a bumpy 4 years, it will end. It won't last forever. And I'm sure that, anyone who decides to temporarily leave for a 4-year period could reapply and come back, assuming they still have the job offers and meet all the qualifications. Okay, sorry, let's see. Do we have any others that came in advance? I think, because, some of these I think we've answered. So
I think Anna asked a question.
Okay. Anna from Cancun asks, will the elections affect Mexican citizens who are applying for O-1s?
again, if Harris is elected, we don't foresee any negative impact. And if Trump is reelected, any restrictions or difficulties will likely happen on an embassy level, as we also previously discussed. So, and on the embassy level, applicants or individuals, trying to enter on visas are typically screened for national security, not for, O-1 eligibility. Okay. So, so one of our last questions we have here comes from Faris in Lebanon, and they ask, will Arabs or Middle Eastern citizens have lower chances for the O-1 visa under Trump?
Okay, so Faris, again, we don't expect USCIS to reduce their approval rate. So I anticipate that citizens of all countries will be deemed to have extraordinary ability at the same rate they have been. But in response to your question, there are a few policies that do disproportionately impact Muslim people. So, some of the policies that the Trump administration is proposing, they are proposing to deport pro-Palestinian student protesters. They are also talking about bringing back the Muslim ban, which bans citizens of 7 countries, primarily Muslim, though it does also include North Korea and Venezuela. And they're talking about adding Gaza to this list. And then there's also the stated intention to bar people who are sympathizers of Hamas, although I believe that is, even though that's the stated policy, Trump's future stated policy, I believe that actually is in place already, essentially. So will it make it more difficult for Arabs and Middle Eastern people to get O-1s? Under Biden-Harris, we would not expect any difficulties. Under a Trump administration. We'll have to see what they're going to do at the embassy level. And also, even if all these policies go into effect, obviously they do not impact all Muslim people, but we'll have to see how it's implemented.
Okay. All right. Why don't we go to the chat? There's quite a few questions waiting here. The first one comes from Alejandro, and he asks, hello, thanks for the webinar. I have a self-petition green card application that was finally denied after a motion to appeal this past April. I still have a valid EAD until September 2025. Is there anything I can do with my case if or when immigration policies change next year?
So, how to answer that? So, well, Alejandro, I think we'd have to talk individually, but I don't know that there's anything in particular that's going to change an immigration policy that's going to impact your situation, other than the fact that, if there is another Trump administration, I would expect EB-1 approvals to be more difficult. I don't expect them to get easier under either administration. So we would have to talk about your specific situation and what options you would have. So reach out, please, individually, and we'll talk.
Okay. And another question comes in. Will there be any impact on family-based green cards?
So that's a great question, too. So, the Biden administration just implemented a policy that was meant to help the undocumented spouses and children of U.S. citizens, but unfortunately it was blocked by litigation. Harris-Walz administration has indicated their intent to continue on with that program, so that would be something positive. Also under, Biden-Harris, which we hope will carry over into Harris-Walz, would be the fact that family-based green card applicants are by and large not interviewed anymore, making the process a little bit smoother. Under Trump, on the other hand, everyone was required to be interviewed, including employment-based green card applicants. So other changes to family-based immigration policy, nothing that I am aware of other than the fact that in general, under the Trump administration, processing was just longer.
Okay. I see a few questions here that they're asking essentially the same thing. And basically, when do new administrative policies kick in? If there are any policy changes, when is the earliest they will take effect?
Well, in theory, they could take effect day one if either of the candidates are prepared to take action immediately. So it will really be up to, each candidate or whoever is elected will enact whatever actions in whenever they're ready. I am sure that I'm actually not familiar with what either candidate has pledged as day one policies. Again, Harris hasn't announced many specifics about immigration overall and not specifically related to O-1s, EB-1s. So, what we saw last time under Trump was that the EB-1 impact we saw was about 2 years after, after the administration started.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't foresee anything major happening within, the first few months to O's or O1s or EB1s. So anyone who has a pending case right now, I don't think you need to be too worried. However, the election turns out.
I agree.
Okay. Okay. This comes from Sheng Yin, and they ask, on October 2nd, 2024, USCIS issued new guidance on EB-1 eligibility criteria for individuals with extraordinary ability. What are your thoughts on this? Positively, does it affect the O-1 visa?
So the policy guidance that came out recently was related to the EB-1 green cards. It doesn't directly extend to the O-1s, though if in any specific case we find it to be helpful, we can always point to it as, relevant guidance. So I think that overall, the new policies are related to membership in associations that require outstanding achievement, as well as the exhibition of work at artistic exhibitions.
Awards.
And thank you, and awards. So I think, I'm kind of neutral on this new guidance. I don't think that it's going to make a huge impact either way. The way that USCIS applies these regulations, it changes their trends and it ebbs and flows. So I'm glad that they're looking at EB-1 policy. I think this is positive, and I think that it means that there are advocates and that there are enough people out there taking action and requiring this kind of explanation and clarity. But I don't think that the new policies are going to make a huge difference either way.
Okay. One more question comes in from Wasim, and he asks, would an EB-1 visa be the most effective route if a feature film is picked up by a reputable studio as screenwriter and actor of the project? Will either administration impact eligibility? Kind of a two-part question there.
Well, so I would say that, the chances of, again, EB-1 approval are going to be better under Harris-Walz than Trump. Now, the question of whether having a feature film picked up is going to be a sufficient basis for an EB-1 is kind of a different question. So, we're not here to delve into the specifics of O-1 and EB-1 cases today, but I would encourage you to reach out to us directly to see if you want to know more about the qualification. Having feature film certainly is a positive factor. If there's only one, is it sufficient? Not sure. We'll have to see what else there is to talk about.
Okay. Ginger asks, when you say changes can take effect on day one, are you referring to the day after the election in November or the day after the new president takes office in January.
Yeah. So after the president takes office in January.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to take a couple more questions. And then after that, if you do have additional questions that you want to ask, you can always email us or put them directly under the YouTube video, and we are happy to answer them. Okay. Edna asks, percentage approval of people already in U.S. is higher compared to people applying outside. Is it the approval higher if doing a change of status from O-1A to EB-1? Are Central American people less likely approved? Okay.
Sorry. So do you want to go ahead and answer that one? Or
I don't quite understand. Let me break it down a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions in there.
Okay, so it's asking if people get approved, if there's a higher rate of approval for change of status versus consular processing.
And actually, I'm not aware that USCIS actually releases that information, but I don't think so. And also based on the fact that O1 still are approved at, over 90% rate, I doubt there's any difference. I haven't noticed any difference in approvability when people are changing status versus consular processing.
Correct.
I also have not noticed a difference for people from Central American countries. I think that in general, I think that O1s and EB1s, I don't notice that they're denied at a higher rate for citizens of specific countries.
Same. I think that it's case by case basis based on eligibility. Okay, and this will be the last question that we're taking during our live stream, and it comes from Pelama Melanora, and they ask, what steps can applicants take to safeguard their immigration status amid potential policy changes resulting from the election, if any?
That's a really great question. So I think the best thing we can do is get as much information as you can, as early as you can, and whatever actions you're eligible to take them as early as possible. And that will ensure that if we need to move on to plan B, that there's time to do so. So I think it's, try to identify as many plans of action as possible. A, B, C, if you're lucky enough to have 3 different ones, and then make a plan, which order you want to do them in, and take the action on them as early as you can legally, in order to leave as much processing time and time for backups if necessary. But thank you for that question. It's a really good one.
Okay. Well, that concludes our questions.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. If there are any questions that somehow we overlooked, we'll be happy to reply by email if we have your contact information.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's live stream presented by Global Talent Immigration Law Group. We hope you found the discussion valuable and informative. A special thanks to our experts, attorneys Liz Perfumo and Jordana Schwartz-Matricardi, for their insights on how the election may impact O1 and EB-1 visas. If your question was not addressed during today's session, or if you have further inquiries, we encourage you to visit our website at globaltalentlaw.com for more information or to schedule a consultation. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and other social media platforms to stay updated on future live streams and immigration updates. If you found today's session helpful, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great day.